And now, up next, I'm so excited to introduce our very first panel discussion of the day. Please join me in giving a huge round of applause for Jennifer Pichardo, Elizabeth Acevedo, Sherazade Garcia, Bonnie Ramirez, and Sully Bonelli.
Good morning. How are we doing? ¿Estamos bien? My name is Jennifer Pichardo. I am the Senior Advancement Officer at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Latino, and I am pleased to welcome you all today to our opening panel. Thank you to Congressman Adriano Espaillat and the team for hosting the 6th Annual Dominicans on the Hill and putting together this fabulous program. And so I think everyone is here to learn about these brilliant artists, and instead of reading their bios, I'm going to kick it off and ask each of them to give a short introduction and to share a little about their journey and how they got here. So we'll start with Bonnie Ramirez.
Hello. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming today. Thank you for hosting us and listening to our stories. My name is Bonnie Ramirez. I'm a visual artist, mainly working in sculpture and painting. I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic. De Tenares, si alguien de Tenares, no sé. And I like to describe my work as almost like an exploration and celebration of Caribbean arts and culture through different themes. I primarily work on figurative painting, a lot of times in also sculpture with different materials. I'm a self-taught artist, so I think I tend to experiment a lot, so I work with very different materials. So the work might look like paintings, but they're almost like a mixed media collage of different materials. I think I work a lot from just my memory in Dominican Republic, growing up there. So I tend to not use references so much so that it makes it a little bit more surreal. I like to tell, the story of our culture and our people through these different compositions. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sherazade Garcia. I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic, and I came to New York because I came to continue my studies at Parsons School of Design, and I fell in love with New York. I stayed in New York, and I became a Dominican New York. And I studied at Parsons, and then I did my graduate studies, my MFA at City College, CUNY, where I got still more involved with my Dominicans. My work is all about the crossing of the Atlantic and what happened of these encounters in the Caribbean. So my work is all about the Caribbean and the richness and how important our islands are for what we call America. And right now, I am a professor of art in the University of Austin, University of Texas at Austin. And also, I am also there collecting my Dominicans. So thank you.
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Acevedo. Love you. I am so hype. I live here in DC. I've lived in DC for 18 years. I walk by the Capitol building all the time. I have never seen a Dominican flag this big in this city. And so I am honored that you all are here. Again, Elizabeth Acevedo, I'm a novelist and a poet. I have several different books. I was born and raised in New York City. My father is from La Capital, Cristo Rey. My mother is from Los Piñales, Cotuí. And my work is heavily influenced by them, by their stories, by the intersection of being from New York, but also longing for the home that they told me about. And I can't believe I'm on a stage with these incredible artists, so I look forward to speaking with you all.
Hi guys, my name is Sully Bonelli. Happy to be here. I was born in the Dominican Republic and I lived there until I was 23 years old. My father from Santiago, my mother from La Vega. And I studied architecture in La UAS, but my dream was to be a fashion designer. In those days, there were no fashion schools, so I moved to New York to pursue my dream. And I became a fashion designer. I graduated from Parsons, like Sherazad. And I opened my business in 1993. My first job was the great Oscar de la Renta. And in my first interview with Oscar, he said to me, Sully, I have to give you an advice. And he didn't give many advices. He says, never denied where you come from. You're not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but the people that really like you, they are going to love you. And that is my motto. I have my business since 1983, like I said, and in my personal life and in my professional life, I am the fusion of the flag that witnessed my birth and the flag that opened their arms and offer me my success. Thank you very much.
Thank you. See why I asked them to introduce themselves? All right, let's get this started. So today's theme of this program is Dominicans Breaking Barriers. Could you share with us some of the barriers you've had to overcome to get where you are today? Start with you.
Yes, I think for me, honestly, the biggest barrier, other than like, coming to this country, brand new in a way, back in 2009, it was that I wasn't able to go to school. So, I really always wanted to be an artist. I always knew that I wanted to be, do something creative. I honestly didn't think it was going to be possible. So I think for me, the biggest obstacle at that point was not having a degree. I think, especially in the arts, is something that can literally open the doors beyond all, the connections that you make in school or the people that you meet there, but also like how school helps you, have access to all these different materials and different things that you can use. So for a while, I felt like I was like left behind because I didn't have access to those things. And I knew that it was going to be a little bit harder. Again, specifically in the arts, it's always like, okay, what school did you go to? The difference between like arts and a lot of other degrees is that a lot of times, specifically for visual artists, is like subjective. It's like when you're a doctor, you have certain degrees that prove how good you are. When you're an artist, it's mainly just like the work, then that is determined by the public a lot of times. So I think that was the one thing that really like set me back a lot of times. I used to work construction. That was my job since I graduated high school in 2014. But I just kept working, on the weekends and stuff, on my work and stuff. And I think, especially in the pandemic, was where everything kind of took off for me. Just me, just being out there, putting my work out there, mainly like on social media and stuff. And I think that's where I was like, I don't want to say discovered, but that's where like my work started connecting with more people now that everybody was home. So from there, that's where I got like all the opportunities working with different galleries and stuff. And I think that's just like a quick summary of like, I think, again, one of the biggest obstacles was like not having like a formal upper education, only the high school degree.
One thing that happened to me when I came here, it was that I was very surprised. I was an interdisciplinary artist coming from Dominican Republic, from Altos de Chabón. I went to Altos de Chabón. I come from a family with artists and writers, so I guess I was prepared for the craziness. And then when I came to Parsons, I found it way more welcoming than I thought. But also, when I say welcoming, it doesn't mean that it was easy. I realized that our job was enormous as a Dominican from the Caribbean. It's like to break these stereotypes, because it's easy. It's like you put a label and people don't have to think. And the moment they encounter all these Dominicans that came to Parsons because Alto de Chabón, they realized it was a very complex conversation. And that complexity of like we are so plural, we are so diverse of people, is something that is extremely important in my work. As a matter of fact, many times I said that my work is all about politics of inclusion. And politics of inclusion is complex, as we all know. Because we are Caribbeans, we are a plethora of languages, a plethora of colors. How wonderful, how difficult. But since when easy things are good? What is good is when things you have to think, when you have to question. And then that's why, if you take a look at my paintings, you're going to see that almost all my characters are characters that are of color. They usually, I call them cinnamon, canela. But it is not because they look good only. I mean, aesthetics is super important for me. I come from art and design. But the meaning behind that color is that when we mix all the colors in a palette, that I call, that is a inclusive action. So the outcome of that mixing is usually brown. So that brown becomes democratic because it really don't leave any story behind. One thing that I learned, because as an artist, we are all ambassadors of our people, is that it was very hard to tell everybody's story. But all those stories belong to me. And I am representing something so big. So then that's why my work is always about this canela, and then all the characters belong to what I call a global Caribbean. So it's more about how I found barriers, but I also found ways to break them. And one thing that happened to me that I think was very meaningful, it was when I was part of the exhibition in the Smithsonian Museum of American Art, All America. It was in 2013. It was curated by Carmen E. Ramos. Carmen is originally from Santiago. She's right now the chief curator of the Museum of National Gallery. And at that time, the piece that they used for to invite people to the exhibition, it was my work. And you know the work it was? It was the image of the Dominican York. And it said, Dominican York. And it was all about how wonderful, diverse, and complex is this country. And I was very proud at that moment.
Thank you.
I think my story might be closer to Bonnie's. The most difficult barrier that I faced is that when you talk about someone being a writer or a novelist in the United States, it's a really privileged position. It is often folks who come from money, who can go to the best schools, not a tiguerita from Harlem who went to a public Title I school, right? Whose grammar was at best proficient. And so when I would think about what kind of writer do I want to be, I've been writing poetry since I was little. Before I could write, I was reciting. My grandfather used to recite riddles to me. And they would be long 20-minute riddles, and I would try to memorize them with him. And so for me, poetry, this storytelling, started before I ever had writing. But when I looked around at the books I got in school, at the writers we were told these are the best writers, they weren't Dominican, right? Or we had one or two, Julia Alvarez, eventually Juno Diaz, right? And no shade to them because I love Julia. She's like an auntie to me. I love Juno's work. But you didn't see enough. And so when I had to imagine what is the path forward, there was no clear answer on what that looked like. Similarly, if you want to be a lawyer, you go to school, you do well, you go to law school, you join a firm, you da-da-da-da-da-da. You want to be an artist, it's like, well, go write, and maybe someone will read it, right? It's not quite the same. And so I think the barrier was a mental one of, do I trust myself and my thoughts enough that I will pursue something even though I have no evidence that it will ever amount to anything more than just to bring me pleasure and to bring me solace, right? And so I just had to trust, like, this is worthy, even if it is just for me. And I was lucky that other people found their way to that work. But I think that that's the biggest leap of faith, is just that you might be putting hours and time into something and it may never go anywhere because there's no clear kind of scaffold up. There's just hoping, right? And so for me, that I don't have faith in a lot of things, so that faith was difficult to have in myself.
Well, for me, my first barrier was very simple, which I'm sure for a lot of you that come from the Dominican Republic had the same problem as me, which was the language barrier. I had to tackle the language because in my thoughts is that if I am going to live in the United States, I need to speak that language as best I can. And up until today, I always correct myself because I want to be a good representative of my country in another language. So for me, I tackled that barrier first, and I conquered it. And then there were many more barriers to conquer, but I was very lucky that when I decided and when people saw my passion on what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go, I got help from strangers, people that didn't know me from anything. They just saw what my passion was, and they were willing to help somebody that they didn't know from anything. So that was another barrier that I didn't even know that I had to conquer. But here I am, 44 years later, sitting with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question I have is, ni de aquí, ni de allá. Neither from here nor there. This is something that we all struggle with, right? It informs a lot of our work, our professional careers, our personal lives, this duality that we live in. Can you share a little bit about your experience with your identities and how you have navigated intersectionality of being Dominican and American, and both?
Yeah, I think for me, it's almost like a little bit literal too, because I came to this country in 2009 when I was 13. And now I think as of last year, now I have like the same amount of time in the US. So I think a lot of times I do think about like when people ask me like, do I say that I was born and raised in the United States, or do I say that I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic? Because, you know, of course, I think, especially in my work, I think a lot of the things that you see are the things that you see in the Dominican Republic, but I think a big part of my work is like exploring a lot of the immigrant experience. So I think it's always just part of the identity. I think it sometimes is difficult to not get so like entangled into American culture that sometimes you can forget. But I think that's, specifically for me, my way of kind of like staying grounded in my culture and my roots is through my work. I haven't visited Dominican Republic in a while, so for me, a lot of the compositions of my paintings and my sculptures are things that I try to force myself to remember. So that's my way of like always staying connected to that. And yeah, I think it's muchas veces es difícil hasta explicar, like, oh, when you tell somebody, oh, I'm Dominican, and they're like, oh, ¿dónde está eso? Like, where is that? And it still happens, like, throughout, like, that's why I think panels like this are important, like, that all of our stories are this unique, because it shows that, you know, that little island called Dominican Republic exists and it has a place, you know, in the world and in society and in America. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Well, aquí, un poquito allá, there was an exhibition we had in 1992, then it was un poquito aquí, un poquito allá, with, by the way, my sister was there, it was also Herman Perez, a group of that time came, that people came to be an artist in New York. I embrace it. I embrace the complexity a lot. Because my work is so embedded in history, I see that our island, that it was the beginning of everything. Our island was the beginning of everything, people. You know, the whole thing of this American dream came from that island. And I always see it I see myself of the extended island, then move to another island in this country. So I always embrace that idea that it's okay to be plural. It's okay. So I try to navigate the best I can, you know, taking the best that I found here and having the best that I have from the Dominican Republic. Because I came at a point where I was already a young adult. So then I have a very heavy experience of the Dominican Republic, but I feel very much embedded in this country as well. So I embrace it.
Thank you.
I was lucky enough that I would spend the summers in La Capital with my cousins, one of whom might be here. My mom is one of 15. I have 76 first cousins, and I would spend it with, I would spend it shuffling around all the tias and the tios for like the entire summer, right? And so I got to see a lot of different ways that folks lived and walked, and I got to spend time with cousins who were having very different experiences along the lines of privilege. And I yearned for those summers. I loved going to DR, right? Like, my brothers didn't love it. I was like, se fue la luz. I found this so exciting. Like, what are we going to do in the dark, right? Like, they hated that the toilet wouldn't flush. And I'm like, that's just what it is. That's what it is in this moment. Like, for me, there was a richness to what my mother had told me, and then to be there and say, here is a flag I can hold up, even when I'm in the U.S. and no one knows what I am. Where they keep asking this question and I don't have the language yet to give a good answer, right? And Dominican American became quite a tension because I would go to DR and I was always la gringa, right? Even though they loved me, I was la gringa cousin. It was in how I walked. I didn't like showing my toes, so I would be walking around with Timberlands in 90-degree weather. They're like, girl, what are you doing, right? And in the U.S., I had an accent. Spanish was my first language until I went to bilingual school, in first grade. So I have this kind of way I carry myself where I couldn't figure out how to fit in. And it felt desperate to me when I was little to do so. And I think over time I learned the hyphen, Dominican American, that hyphen is a place where you can stand. It is a place that you can occupy with pride and say, no, I'm not going to choose. I lean in depending on where I am and what feels most comfortable, right? I dream in Spanish sometimes. I speak in English. I read in this. Pienso en eso. When I want to sing in Spanish, right? The language that I sing lullabies to my son to is a year old, only in Spanish. I only know Spanish language lullabies. So for me, it's realizing, what I really have is multiple toolboxes that I can pull from. And I don't exist here alone. There are other people who also stand on the hyphen, and we're all here together. So it felt lonely growing up. But realizing, actually, I can look around and see who else is in the same space, and we hold that space together was incredibly empowering because it meant there was no choosing, and there was no need to perform. I have to perform Dominicanness perfectly. I have to perform Americanness perfectly. Once I released that, it's like, no, yo estoy en el medio y ya. That's it, what's up? And I could hold that. So I love the hyphen these days because I think there's a lot of power in that connection and the fact that it evokes connection.
Thank you for that. And I've been notified that we have a 2-minute interruption for a member of Congress that's going to give brief remarks.
La verdad que estamos teniendo un panel de mucha sustancia, pero los congresistas aman mucho la comunidad dominicana y cuando terminan de votar quieren venir a hablar con ustedes. Un momentito, vamos a una pausa con el panel. Gracias. Up next, Congress Member Darren Soto.
Bienvenidos, mi gente dominicana. Es muy importante para ustedes estar aquí para asegurar que todos los congresistas puedan escuchar sus voces, el voz del pueblo. Y yo estoy muy agradecido de Congresista Espaillat. Un aplauso por Congresista Espaillat, el hijo favorito de la comunidad. Soy su hermano boricua de Orlando. ¿Dónde están mis amigos de Florida? Un aplauso. Hey, Daisy, representante, es un gran honor. Nosotros estamos trabajando en muchos asuntos muy importantes de la comunidad hispana. Trabajos con salarios más altos, protegiendo nuestro ambiente, mejorando nuestra infraestructura y también para proteger opciones de salud. Por ejemplo, Obamacare. Hay más de 4 millones de personas en Florida quienes reciben sus seguros de salud de Obamacare. Y también nosotros necesitamos ayudar a nuestras familias en la República Dominicana. Seguridad aquí es una situación muy difícil ahora y nosotros, un caucus hispano va a apoyar fondos para ayudar. En el pasado nosotros tenemos el presidente de la República Dominicana en el año pasado y especialmente por negocios y recuperación después de huracanes. Nosotros a floridanos sabe huracanes, créeme. Entonces, bienvenidos, gracias por asistir. Yo entiendo, hay muchos fans de béisbol en este cuarto, ¿sí? En serio, era un tiempo cuando hay mucho más boricua en béisbol de dominicanos, pero ahora ustedes están ganando esta competición, un poquito. Gracias, bienvenidos, welcome to Washington. We're so honored to have you all. Let your voices be heard and welcome.
Muchas gracias, Congress Member Darren Soto. And now we can continue with the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Sully?
My turn. So, for me, here and there, it's actually not that complicated. In my personal life, I'm very attached to the Dominican Republic because the Bonelli family is a very large family, and we are very close. And we do reunions every so often that could be from 200 to 450 Bonelli. So that is in my personal life. In my professional life, I learned something from Oscar de la Renta. Take inspiration from the inspiration is right there for you. And it was right there for you from day one. And that's what I do. For me, the Dominican Republic is it's a source of inspiration that never ends. It's so much that we had, we can talk about the colors, but we can talk about so many other things. So those two things keep me attached to the island, and I am Dominican. So what can I tell you? It's, I can't go from there.
Thank you. And Sully, let's follow up on that. So can you explain or share with us a bit about what your creative process is in fashion design? I think we all want to learn also about what the process is.
Well, in fashion, we do things internationally, not just for the United States. And basically in fashion, we have to, if we're working, producing things in other countries, we need to work at least a year in advance. So that means fashion designers have to know what everybody here is going to wear next year, that you have no idea what you're wearing next year. But we do, because we have to design it this year if we want to produce it. So that's basically how we start, a year prior. That's with the date. And then there is, the inspiration for a collection has to be new. Every year has to be new. Every season has to be new. And so for me, what I do is I keep my book of inspiration, let's say, where I could be inspired by music, a color, a place. I travel the world. And then I sort of shelve it until I know what that inspiration is going to trigger when I opened it again. And when I'm ready to design a collection, let's say, I don't know, primavera del año que viene, it's spring, so I opened that book, and then I said, this is what I thought that I wanted to do for next year. But maybe I thought of it 6 months ago. But I don't go back to it. I just put it there, and then I start building a collection because it's a business. So you have to make clothes to sell for whatever the market is that I'm designing, for whatever the store is I'm designing. So they have to sell. So I focus on that. I probably think about, so what sold last year? I get a report of what sold last year, and then I go from there. And then it's like a puzzle where you start building this thing, and then this idea gives you other ideas, and in the end, that's it. You have a deadline because it needs to be presented to the stores so that the stores can buy what they like, and then we can produce. Or they can produce. You know, we design a lot of things for specific stores around the world.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Being a writer is being a really good observer. You have to be constantly aware that something is happening that you're going to potentially have to use. And you have to be a good collector of that thing. I don't always know what my next book is about, and every book teaches me a different way to write it, right? But one thing I'm really good at is I'm an ear hustler. I'm always listening. I'm like, I'm stealing that, right? I was a little girl, "Tu estás comiendo boca." I'm like, yup, I'm taking that. I'm that kind of kid, right? And I still have that because you don't know what you're going to need. Right, so my first book, The Poet X, was about a girl who wanted to be a slam poet. She wanted to do competitive poetry, but her mother was really religious, and she's like, "En esta casa no va a haber nada de eso. Like, you're gonna sit down, do your confirmation, and be quiet." And she had all this stuff she wanted to say. My last book was about a woman who was 70 and decided to throw herself a living wake. And you're following her and each of her sisters as they're preparing for this wake. Right, and so every story is completely different, and I just have to be someone who's trusting the process, that I don't know what I'm going to need when, but I just have to be observant. Even when I'm in an interaction where I'm really upset at someone, I'm angry, I have to think about, where am I upset? If I had to describe this, how would I describe it? Oh, you know what, I'm mad, but I'm gonna go write this down real quick, right? Because I'm gonna come back to that. I don't plot, I don't outline. For me, I don't wanna know too much because it takes the joy of writing. I delight in discovery. As I'm writing, I'm like, "Oh, esto está bueno," right? Like, I get into it, and that to me is what brings me back, that there's joy there, there's surprise there. I am making something, and at the same time, it is remaking me. It is teaching me something I didn't know. When I write a 70-year-old woman, I learn more about my mother than I have ever learned from her, because I have to put myself in her shoes and the kinds of choices she might make. And so then I have to approach her differently because of the work that I'm doing. So I guess my process is one of, how am I practicing empathy? How am I following character? And how do I prioritize human emotions and the human experience over, a beginning, a middle, and an end? Like, that to me, that's somebody else's process, but for me, is it delightful? And if it's delightful for me, then there's going to be something for a reader that will spark sometimes hatred, sometimes dislike, but it sparks something. And that's all I want to achieve in a work, is that you feel something and realize a human made something for me, and I'm having an experience while reading this in whatever capacity, because it's pushing me to feel.
I forgot to give it to you. But anyway, I was just thinking that I wish we have the images here because you could see it. I am a storyteller, and I collect stories and I collective. And just like you, Elizabeth, I keep collecting. You know, I listen to people, I observe, and then I am fascinated by history. So then I love the fact that history is told by people that are the winners. So I love to read between the lines and dismantle it. And then all my work that has a complexity, and I find that beauty, and joy, actually, are the resilience. You know, it's like when you see the carnival. The carnival is born out of survival. So I love to play with that. What is behind that beauty? You know, is fortitude, you know, resilience. So that's how I work. I collect stories and I infuse imagination. And then I am in some kind of crazy music, you know, but it's always a music that is between tragedy and unbelievable beauty. So it's like always like in between navigating. I am always navigating. That's what I think. So anyways, that's my process. And also, aesthetically, like I said before with the color cinnamon, because I talk so much about layers and how complex we are, so my work, it can be a sculpture. It can be paintings on paper. And even the paintings have many, many layers because I want to make sure alludes to how many layers I belong to. You know, and then the softest, I do a sculpture, but they are soft. Why they are soft? They are soft because my sculpture should be able to be packed in a suitcase and be taken in an airplane. So it's this idea of we adaptable, you know? Anyways, that's how I think.
For me, my creative process, I think it varies from like show to show. I think that, you know, beyond the paintings and the sculptures, I think I like to work like with a body of work. So it'll come just from one idea and then I can like take it apart into different layers. My work, it includes a lot of materials. It's basically these like collage, large-scale paintings that look like paintings, but they're not paintings. So it's very like literally layered, but also like you mentioned, like I think our work is like very layered also, like in meaning and different things. So I think in my case, when I'm working on a specific show, I try to, you know, of course, always have like the main idea of my practice, but that to have like a different kind of story or meaning throughout the shows. I'm the kind of artist that also works with the space that I'm showing with. So I always like to like either paint the walls, do a mural, or do something where like the viewer itself feels transported into the worlds that I create. And I think that's a quick summary of like the process itself. Again, it can start, a lot of times it comes from just an idea from my childhood. You know, I think I go back a lot mentally to the Dominican Republic, and I always try to like tackle things that I didn't think I remembered. O puede ser alguna vez cuando tú no estás en Instagram y uno ve una foto de una casa de campo y uno se recuerda de una memoria específica que uno pasó ahí, and then that can trigger like a story itself. So yeah, I think it can start from a simple idea, then I just start to like deconstruct it, for example.
Thank you. So my next question is, you're all brilliant artists paving your own way and breaking barriers, but you're also opening doors for the next generation. As you think about that, what would you like your legacy to be? What would you like to be remembered for?
For me, I think one of the main things as an artist, especially like a self-taught artist, is when I was trying to look for examples of who to follow and who accomplished the things that I want to accomplish, I didn't find a lot of, you know, role models. I think that's one thing that I think, not that I want to be a role model per se, but that I really want people to see that if I can make it, anybody can make it. I think that's why it's important to, you know, tell your story of like, yes, I couldn't go to school because I couldn't afford it, and like all these other things. So, you know, it was difficult to, you know, grab onto like something or somebody that I'm like, okay, si esa gente lo hizo, yo lo puedo hacer, pero yo no tenía ese tipo de ejemplo. So for me, I kind of want to be that, more on the side of, you know, being more like self-taught artist. Yo siempre voy a decir, siempre vayan a la escuela, si ustedes pueden, vayan a la escuela, pero cuando no se puede, no significa que es el final de la vida de uno, which is kind of how I felt at that time a little bit. So again, I think I just want to be a voice for that, that as long as you have the will and the power and that you put in work and effort into perfecting your craft, you know, your dreams are definitely possible.
The project I hated most in school was when they would have you do a family crest and a family like timeline and like my great-grandfather, my great-great-grand, and I didn't have all that, right? Like I knew my great-grandmother's name and that's it. That's as far back as I could go. And I think a lot of my writing is about honoring the people I come from, learning as many names as possible, and holding up the lineage, both blood lineage that I come from, saying, no, my great-grandmother, like, you know, Ana Mercedes is as worthy of saying as all of these other people they had me memorize in school. And I'm gonna put their names in my books and have other people memorize them in the same way I had to do that work. And so it's holding that up, but it is also forward, that I think I'm in the middle. It's how do I honor my ancestors and my artistic ancestors, right, the writers who formed who I am, and how do I give a template or a blueprint for writers coming after that kind of empowers them. As specific as your story is, there is someone who should read you. And there's someone for you out there, right? And don't get caught up in, oh, the sound of the time, or the trend is this, or what people want is that. Eso se pasa, right? Like, how do you say something that is truthful? And when we do that, when I think we're chasing truth, that lasts long after all of the other fluff, right, falls away. And so I hope that that is my legacy, that I loved my people both backwards and forwards, even as I was right here.
Okay. Well, think so, yeah. I think it's important to be, I like to be an agent of change. You know, and this idea that I always have is like to be able to be somebody that creates and encourage different platforms for expression. But these different platforms for expression need to be really with good foundation. Like people need to understand that we need to understand our past, to understand our present, and to even imagine the future. So it's being always this fight of mine. Like when I think about with my students, which are the new generation and I adore, is the idea that it is not about following the professor or the teacher or the mentor. The mentor is great, but I don't want you to be just like me. I want you to be better and to have faith in a new vision as artists, you know? So in other ways, I would like to say that I would like to encourage the new generation to be brave and to have faith in their views and in their history. That's how I see it.
You know, it's always great if one is remembered by what you did, because there was a lot of effort during your lifetime doing what you're doing. But I work in fashion, and fashion passes by, and it falls out of fashion. So for me, what I want to be remembered by is how it was, I was a help to the community, to my Dominican community, and to my design community. What can I pass along that I'm not interested that I'm remembered around the world. I'm interested in that I'm remembered to specific people that remember me for passing them into the next thing. Whatever the next trend is, whatever the next thing is with our community, that's what I want to be remembered, and that's what I work for.
Thank you. They're signaling that we're running out of time, and so we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank each and every one of you for your time. Yes. Go ahead.
I know that at a day like this, there's probably a lot of things that seem really important, and a panel on the arts may seem superficial or frivolous or on the side. And I just want to say that I think it's so important that we started with this kind of panel, that we have this here, and that we hold it at the same bar as education, as politics, as legislation. The arts bring us together, right? If we all hear Ojalá que llueva café, like we're all going to start singing, right? If we watch Bantu Mama, we see ourselves in that. When we hold each other, we know that the freedom song that we learned from our parents and from their parents, that's the song we still sing today. And so I just want to say that I think it's so important for all of us to be thinking about the arts in whatever capacity of power we have, because it saves our lives, it saves our spirits, and it's something we can give to our children and their children. And so thank you for holding this panel, and I hope that you continue to have it.
Thank you. And I just want to add that this is why we're building a National Museum of the American Latino to ensure that these stories are told and shared for future generations. Thank you all for your time and for being here. Thank you.